The Wyoming wind wailed like a lonely coyote across the open plains, kicking dust into every crack of Samuel McKenna's weather-beaten ranch. The horizon stretched out forever, a sea of dry grass and stubborn sagebrush. Samuel, 43, stood on the porch, his broad shoulders set like fence posts against the wind. His face was tanned and lined from years of work, his hands scarred and calloused. 3 winters had passed since Martha died of consumption, leaving him with nothing but cattle, broken hinges, and a silence so heavy it pressed on his chest. Every evening was the same. He sat at the kitchen table staring at Martha's apron, still hanging by the stove. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath. The loneliness gnawed at him until he finally did something he never thought he'd do. He wrote to a Chicago matrimonial agency. His letter was simple, practical. He asked for a woman between 25 and 35, slim, quiet, hardworking, someone who wouldn't complain about the drought or the long winters. This wasn't about love. Love was a luxury. This was about survival. When the agency wrote back promising a suitable bride in 2 months' time, Samuel threw himself into repairs, fixing the sagging door, patching fences, clearing out mice. Every nail he drove felt like he was hammering his life back together. But even as he worked, Martha's laughter haunted him more than the thought of someone new. On the day his new wife was due to arrive, Samuel put on his best starched shirt and went to Cedar Ridge Station. He paced until the station master asked if he was sick. When the train hissed to a stop, passengers spilled out, ranch hands, salesmen, a preacher. His stomach twisted when the crowd thinned and no one remained. Then the last passenger stepped down. Margaret O'Brien was nothing like he expected. She was strong in her build, her traveling dress fitted tight, her face handsome, her gray eyes sharp and steady. Her dark curls peeked from her bonnet. "Mr. McKenna," she said, her voice carrying both Irish warmth and Boston grit. He tipped his hat. "Miss O'Brien." She climbed into the wagon without waiting for his help. The buckboard creaked under their weight as he drove her toward the ranch, the silence between them broken only by the rattle of wheels. "The agency said you were a widower," she said at last. 3 years this winter," he replied. "I'm sorry for your loss." She held his gaze. "I know what you asked for, and slim, obedient, hardworking. I'm 28, I work hard, but I won't apologize for not being what you pictured." Her words stung like wind-driven sand. Margaret wasted no time making herself at home. By the next morning, coffee was brewing and bacon sizzled on the stove. She scrubbed years of dust from the corners, mended curtains, hauled water without complaint. Samuel admired her grit and resented it. He had asked for a quiet woman to slip into Martha's shadow, not someone who filled every corner of the house with life. One night, he muttered under his breath, "I asked for a wife, not a workhorse." Margaret looked up from her mending, eyes like flint. "Would you rather a delicate flower who faints at the sight of blood? Because that won't keep your herd alive." Her words cut deep because they were true. In town, the gossip started. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson eyed Margaret up and down. "So you're Samuel's new bride. Sturdy woman, aren't you?" Margaret smiled sweetly. "I've always believed a woman should be built for the life she's meant to live. Don't you agree?" The woman's smirk faltered. Even at the feed store, when Jack Morris joked about how well-fed Samuel must be, Margaret spoke before Samuel could bristle. "A man who works as hard as my husband deserves a proper meal." Samuel's pride warred with shame. She was defending him, defending them both, even when he hadn't earned it yet. The sky turned yellow and the wind screamed across the plains. A dust storm barreled toward the ranch. Samuel saw Margaret racing to gather the chickens, skirts whipping in the gale. Together they fought to save the animals, slamming barn doors shut, shoving sacks against cracks. When they finally stumbled inside, Margaret had a cut on her forehead. Samuel pressed a cloth to it, his hands unexpectedly gentle. As the storm raged outside, he asked the question he'd avoided for weeks. "Why did you come west?" Her hands tightened on her coffee mug. "My parents died. My brother inherited everything. His wife made it clear I wasn't wanted. Too old too, substantial. So I took my life into my own hands." For the first time, Samuel saw not just a stranger in his house, but a woman who had fought her own battles just to be standing here. The night Samuel realized how much she meant to him came with firelight and gunpowder. Rustlers came for his horses. Shots rang out in the dark. Samuel was hit, pain blinding him, but Margaret didn't flinch. She stood over him, shotgun in hand, voice like thunder. "You want these horses?" she shouted. "You'll have to come through me." The men fled. When it was over, Margaret dropped beside him, hands shaking as she bound his wound. "I'd fight for this ranch," she whispered. "For you." Samuel gripped her hand. "I see that now. I was a fool to want less." Winter came early, but it no longer felt so cold. Samuel and Margaret worked side by side, shared quiet laughter, told stories by the fire. One night Samuel kissed her, not out of duty but because he wanted to. For the first time, Margaret kissed him back, and the walls between them came down. Months later, on a spring evening full of laughter, the old bed frame gave out with a crack, dumping them both on the floor. Samuel wheezed with laughter. Rancher wanted a slim bride. Got one who broke the bed instead. Margaret buried her face against him, laughing until tears came. "Let them talk," Samuel said, pulling her close. "I got the best damn wife a man could ask for." In the years that followed, children's laughter filled the house. The ranch prospered. The oak bed they built together never broke, and neither did their love. Samuel had asked for a slim, quiet wife. The West gave him Margaret instead, strong, brave, full of life, and she was exactly what he needed. Spring brought fresh grass and restless cattle. Samuel and Margaret rode out together to drive the herd toward the upper pasture. Their two oldest children, Thomas and Claire, followed on smaller ponies eager to help. Margaret sat tall in the saddle, her skirt flaring in the breeze, her shotgun slung across her lap. Samuel couldn't help but feel pride, not just for the ranch, but for the woman who had become its heart. "You ride better than half the hands I've hired," Samuel said with a grin. Margaret's eyes sparkled. "Better than you some days." Their laughter mingled with the lowing of cattle, the Wyoming wind carrying it across the range. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. That summer, a dispute over water rights boiled over. Neighboring rancher Eli Sutton, bitter and mean-spirited, claimed Samuel's herd was grazing on land that wasn't theirs. One hot afternoon, Eli rode up to the McKenna ranch, his men flanking him. "You're on my creek," Eli spat. "Move your herd or I'll move it for you." Samuel stood firm on the porch, hand resting near the rifle, leaning by the door. "That water runs through McKenna land, Sutton. Been that way since my pa drove the first post." Margaret appeared beside him, calm but unyielding. "This ranch isn't moving anywhere," she said evenly. "You want a fight, you'll find one." Eli's eyes narrowed, but he pulled back his reins. "You'll regret this," he muttered, turning his horse. Samuel exhaled slowly, grateful Margaret stood her ground, though the tension coiled tighter in his chest. Trouble was coming. Weeks later it came. Smoke woke them at midnight. The hay barn was ablaze, flames licking at the night sky. Samuel and Margaret raced outside. Samuel grabbed buckets, Margaret roused the children and shouted for the hands. Together they formed a line, passing water, beating flames with wet sacks until their arms ached. By dawn, the barn was a charred ruin, but the cattle were safe, and no lives were lost. Samuel dropped to his knees in the dirt, exhausted. Margaret crouched beside him, soot streaking her face, her eyes blazing with determination. "They tried to break us," she said. "They didn't." Samuel rode to town that morning, rage burning hotter than the fire. He found Eli Sutton at the saloon. "You did this," Samuel said, his voice low but deadly calm. Eli sneered. "Prove it." Samuel's fist landed before Eli could move, sending him sprawling. The saloon went silent. "You come near my land again," Samuel growled, "and you won't walk away." When he returned home, Margaret met him on the porch. Her hands were still blistered from the fire, but her smile was fierce. "You protected what's ours," she said softly. Samuel took her hands in his. "We protected it." Months passed. The dispute cooled, and winter came early again. But this time the ranch felt warmer. Inside the house, the children played by the fire while Margaret sewed and Samuel carved a toy horse from scrap wood. When the first snow fell, Margaret stood at the window watching the white blanket cover the land. Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Remember when this house used to feel so empty?" he murmured. Margaret leaned back against him, smiling softly. "Now it feels full." And it was, full of life, full of laughter, full of the kind of love Samuel never thought he'd find again.